The pregnant bobcat heard the desperate screams of dying kittens buried somewhere beneath 3 feet of frozen snow, and every survival instinct told her to walk away and protect her own unborn litter. She turned back toward the cries anyway, unaware that her decision would create a family that defied everything science understood about her species. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The February wind cut through the Rocky Mountain wilderness like a blade, sending swirls of fresh powder across the already buried landscape. In the heart of Colorado's San Juan National Forest, where temperatures had plummeted to 15 below zero for the 3rd consecutive night, survival was measured in heartbeats and breaths that froze before they could dissipate into the air. This was a world where the weak perished quickly, and even the strong struggled to see another dawn. But nature had a way of writing stories that defied logic, that challenged everything biologists thought they understood about animal behavior and maternal instinct. What was about to unfold in this frozen wilderness would become one of those stories, witnessed by pure chance and forever changing the lives of everyone involved. Dr. Rachel Thornton had been studying wild feline populations in the San Juans for 17 years, and she thought she had seen everything. At 43, with silver streaking through her dark blonde hair and crow's feet etched deep from years of squinting against mountain glare, she had documented mountain lion migrations, tracked lynx through impossible terrain, and observed countless bobcat territorial disputes. Her research had contributed to 3 published papers and helped shape wildlife management policies across the western United States. But on this particular morning, as she checked her remote trail cameras in the high country, she had no idea she was about to witness something that would make her question everything she thought she knew about wildlife behavior. Rachel's snowshoes crunched rhythmically as she made her way through the forest, her breath forming ice crystals on the fur trim of her parka hood. The trail cameras had been positioned strategically along known animal corridors, capturing the secret lives of creatures that moved through the darkness while humans slept safely in their warm beds. Each camera represented months of planning, careful placement, and hopes that the batteries would hold out through the brutal mountain winter. She had already checked 3 stations that morning, downloading footage of the usual suspects: a small herd of elk moving through at twilight, a lone coyote investigating scent markings, even a magnificent bull moose that had wandered through, his massive antlers catching the infrared flash like ghostly branches against the night. The 4th camera station was her favorite, positioned near a rocky outcropping that provided shelter and attracted a diverse array of wildlife. As Rachel approached, she noticed something immediately different about the area. Fresh tracks crisscrossed the snow in patterns that suggested unusual activity, and there were disturbances in the powder that indicated something significant had happened here recently. Her trained eye picked out bobcat tracks, but they seemed to converge from multiple directions, which was odd given that bobcats were typically solitary creatures outside of mating season. The tracks were relatively fresh, probably from the previous night, and they led to and from the rocky overhang in a pattern that made no sense. Rachel carefully removed the camera from its mount, her fingers working quickly despite the thick gloves she wore. The cold was already seeping through her layers, and she knew better than to linger too long in one spot when the temperature hovered this far below freezing. She connected the camera to her rugged laptop, balanced precariously on a flat rock she had cleared of snow, and began scrolling through the footage. The timestamp showed activity beginning around 11 the previous night, and what Rachel saw in those first few frames made her pause, then rewind, then watch again with growing astonishment. A female bobcat appeared on the screen, her movements showing the characteristic gait of late pregnancy. Rachel had seen this particular cat before, having tracked her territory for the past 2 seasons. She had designated her as female B7 in her research notes, a mature bobcat estimated to be around 5 years old with distinctive markings, including a notch in her left ear from some long ago encounter. What made this footage remarkable was not just the bobcat's presence, but where she was going and why. B7 was moving with clear purpose, her head low to the ground, following a scent trail that led her directly toward the rocky outcropping. Rachel advanced the footage frame by frame, watching as the pregnant bobcat approached the rocks with increasing urgency. Then B7 stopped, her body language shifting from purposeful movement to something else entirely. Alert. Tense. The bobcat's ears swiveled forward, focusing on something the camera couldn't yet capture. Rachel found herself leaning closer to the laptop screen, forgetting the cold that was making her fingers ache even through her gloves. This was the behavior of an animal that had detected something important, something that demanded investigation despite the risks. What happened next made Rachel's breath catch in her throat. Another shape appeared at the edge of the frame, this one smaller and moving erratically. A kitten. But not B7's kitten, that much was immediately obvious from the body language. The tiny form stumbled through the snow, its movements weak and uncoordinated, clearly in distress. Rachel could see even in the infrared footage that this kitten was in serious trouble, its gait suggesting hypothermia and exhaustion. Where had it come from? Bobcat kittens born in winter rarely survived, and the timing was all wrong for this to be a naturally occurring litter. The kitten should have been safely denned with its mother, not wandering alone in sub-zero temperatures. B7's reaction was what truly captured Rachel's attention. The pregnant bobcat didn't flee or display aggression as might be expected when encountering another animal's offspring. Instead, she moved closer, her approach cautious but not threatening. The kitten, too weak to flee, simply collapsed in the snow. Rachel watched as B7 sniffed the tiny form, circling it once, twice, 3 times. Then, in a moment that defied typical predator behavior, the pregnant bobcat gently picked up the kitten by its scruff and began carrying it toward the rocky shelter. But the footage wasn't finished revealing its secrets. As B7 disappeared under the overhang with the kitten, the camera captured movement from another direction. A second kitten appeared, this one even smaller than the first, struggling through snow that was nearly as deep as the kitten was tall. The tiny creature was crying, its mouth open in silent distress, calls that the camera couldn't capture, but Rachel could imagine all too well. Every maternal instinct she possessed wanted to reach through time and space to help that struggling baby. Minutes passed in the footage with no sign of B7. Rachel began to wonder if the pregnant bobcat would emerge at all, if perhaps she had simply taken the first kitten into her den and that would be the end of it. But then the distinctive form reappeared, moving quickly now despite her pregnant state. B7 had spotted the second kitten. Without hesitation, she made her way through the deep snow and repeated the rescue, picking up the second kitten with the same careful grip and carrying it back to the shelter. Rachel sat back from the laptop screen, her mind racing to make sense of what she had just witnessed. This wasn't normal bobcat behavior. Females could be fiercely territorial, especially when pregnant and preparing to den. They didn't typically adopt offspring that weren't their own, particularly not when they were so close to giving birth themselves. The energy expenditure alone made no biological sense. Every calorie mattered in winter, and B7 was already supporting her own developing kittens. Taking on additional mouths to feed went against every survival instinct that should have been driving her behavior. But the footage had one more revelation. As Rachel continued watching, a third kitten appeared in the frame an hour later. This one seemed slightly stronger than the others, but it was making the same desperate sound, searching for something, for someone, its mother. Where was their mother? Rachel's professional curiosity warred with a growing sense of dread. 3 kittens alone in the wilderness in the middle of winter meant only one thing. Something had happened to their mother, something catastrophic and final. B7 emerged once more, and Rachel found herself whispering encouragement at the screen despite knowing the outcome was already determined. The pregnant bobcat approached the third kitten, and once again defied all reasonable expectations by picking it up and carrying it to safety. 3 orphaned kittens, all rescued by a pregnant bobcat who should have been focused entirely on her own survival and that of her unborn litter. Rachel checked the timestamp again. The entire sequence of rescues had taken place over approximately 4 hours, with B7 making 3 separate trips into the brutal cold to save kittens that weren't her own. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just an interesting behavioral observation. This was documentation of something that challenged fundamental assumptions about wildlife behavior and maternal instinct across species lines. Rachel's hands were shaking now, though whether from cold or excitement she couldn't tell. She needed to see those kittens. She needed to document their current condition and understand what had driven this remarkable act of compassion. But she also knew that approaching an active den, especially one with a pregnant female and newly acquired kittens, could be disastrous. The wrong move could cause B7 to abandon the site entirely, dooming all the kittens she had worked so hard to save. Rachel made her decision quickly. She would need help, and there was only one person she trusted with something this delicate. Marcus Chen had been her research partner for the past 8 years, a wildlife veterinarian with an uncanny ability to assess situations and make the right call under pressure. At 36, Marcus had treated everything from injured eagles to orphaned bear cubs, and his calm demeanor under stress made him the perfect person for what Rachel was planning. She pulled out her satellite phone, her fingers fumbling with the buttons through her thick gloves. Marcus answered on the second ring, his voice warm despite the early hour. "Rachel, please tell me you're not stuck somewhere. I just made coffee and I'd hate to abandon it for a rescue mission before I've had at least 1 cup. Rachel couldn't help but smile despite the gravity of the situation. "I'm fine, but Marcus, you need to get up here. I've got footage of something that shouldn't be possible." She quickly outlined what she had witnessed on the trail camera, hearing Marcus's breathing change as she described B7's repeated trips into the freezing night to rescue the orphaned kittens. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Marcus, are you still there?" "I'm here, I'm just processing." "Rachel, bobcats don't do this, especially not pregnant females. The energy cost alone would be prohibitive, and the risk of disease transmission from unknown kittens, the territorial issues, it goes against everything we know about their behavior." "I know," Rachel said quietly, staring at the rocky outcropping where she knew the kittens were currently sheltering. "That's why I need you to see this, too. We need to document it properly, and we need to assess those kittens. If they're injured or sick, we might need to intervene." Marcus was already moving. She could hear him gathering equipment in the background. "I'll be there in 45 minutes. Don't approach the den until I arrive. If B7 is already stressed from the rescues, human presence could push her over the edge." Rachel agreed, though every instinct she possessed wanted to climb into that rocky shelter and check on those babies immediately. She knew Marcus was right. Patience was crucial in wildlife work, and rushing in could undo everything B7 had accomplished. While she waited, Rachel reviewed the footage again, this time making detailed notes and capturing still images that showed the progression of events. She zoomed in on the kittens, trying to assess their condition from the grainy infrared footage. They appeared to be roughly 8 to 10 weeks old based on their size and coordination, though malnutrition could make them seem younger than they actually were. Their fur pattern suggested they were indeed bobcat kittens, not some other species, which raised even more questions about where they had come from and what had happened to their mother. The temperature was continuing to drop as the sun climbed higher in the sky, one of those cruel ironies of winter in the high country, where clear skies meant plummeting temperatures. Rachel knew that without intervention, those kittens would not have survived the night. Even with B7's rescue, their chances were far from certain. Hypothermia, starvation, and the simple fact that they were too young to be separated from their mother all worked against their survival, but B7 had given them a chance, and that was more than they'd had before. Marcus arrived exactly 43 minutes later, his truck laboring through the deep snow until he reached the point where Rachel had parked her own vehicle. He emerged bundled in layers of cold weather gear, carrying 2 large packs of veterinary supplies. His Asian features were nearly hidden behind a thick scarf and ski goggles, but Rachel would have recognized his purposeful stride anywhere. He'd brought thermal imaging equipment, she noted with approval. That would allow them to assess the situation without getting too close initially. "Show me the footage first," Marcus said, setting down his equipment and pulling off his goggles. Rachel replayed the entire sequence, watching Marcus's expression shift from skepticism to wonder as he witnessed B7's repeated rescue missions. When the footage ended, he sat back and ran a gloved hand over his face. "I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it myself. The question is, what do we do now?" Rachel had been wrestling with that question since she'd first witnessed the rescues. "We need to assess the kitten's condition, but we can't risk disrupting B7's care. She's already doing something extraordinary. If we spook her, she might abandon them." Marcus nodded slowly, his mind already working through the options. "Let's start with the thermal imaging. We can get a sense of how many heat signatures are in that den and their approximate locations. If the kittens are critically hypothermic, we might see it in their thermal profile." They carefully approached the rocky outcropping, moving with the practiced silence that came from years of fieldwork. Marcus deployed the thermal camera, adjusting the sensitivity and range until he had a clear image of what was happening inside the shelter. The screen showed 4 distinct heat signatures clustered together in the deepest part of the rocky overhang. One larger signature, undoubtedly B7, and 3 smaller ones pressed against her body. "The kittens," Marcus whispered, pointing to the smaller signatures. "They're alive and they're warm. That's a good sign. She's keeping them close, sharing her body heat." Rachel felt relief wash over her. At least the kittens had survived the night. But survival in the short term didn't guarantee long-term success. They still needed food, and B7 was in no condition to hunt for 4 kittens, plus sustain her own pregnancy. Marcus took several thermal images from different angles, documenting the scene thoroughly. "We need to set up remote monitoring," he said quietly. "If we're going to study this behavior, we need continuous observation without human presence. I brought additional trail cameras and a wireless relay system. We can monitor the den in real time from a safe distance." Rachel agreed immediately. This was exactly the kind of documentation they needed, not just for the scientific value, but to ensure the kitten's welfare without interfering with B7's remarkable act of adoption. They spent the next 2 hours setting up a comprehensive monitoring system. 3 additional cameras were positioned at strategic angles around the den, each one carefully camouflaged and positioned to capture different aspects of the bobcat's behavior. Marcus also deployed several environmental sensors that would track temperature, humidity, and even sound levels inside and around the shelter. The wireless relay system would transmit all this data to a laptop they set up in Rachel's truck, allowing them to observe without disturbing the animals. As they worked, Rachel's mind kept returning to the central mystery. Where had these kittens come from? Bobcat territories in this region averaged about 20 square miles for females, though they could be larger or smaller depending on prey density and terrain. B7's territory was well documented from years of tracking. If there had been another female with kittens nearby, Rachel should have known about it. The research team maintained detailed records of all identified bobcats in the study area, and no other females had shown signs of pregnancy or denning behavior. Marcus seemed to be thinking along the same lines. "We need to search the surrounding area," he said as they finished positioning the last camera. "Those kittens came from somewhere, and if their mother is injured or dead nearby, we need to know. It could tell us what happened, And whether there are any environmental factors we should be concerned about, Rachel nodded grimly. The thought of a dead or dying female bobcat was heartbreaking, but it was the most likely explanation for why 3 kittens would be wandering alone in the middle of winter. They decided to split up, each taking a different search pattern, radiating out from where the kittens had first appeared on camera. Rachel moved carefully through the forest, her eyes scanning for any sign of disturbance in the snow, any indication that a struggle or accident had occurred. The wind had picked up slightly, sending small cyclones of powder swirling through the trees, and she had to work carefully to distinguish between natural snow patterns and those created by animal activity. It was Marcus who found her. Rachel's radio crackled to life with his voice, tight with controlled emotion. "Rachel, I've got something. About half a mile northeast of the den site. You need to see this." Rachel changed direction immediately, following Marcus's GPS coordinates through increasingly difficult terrain. The forest here was dense with deadfall, and the snow had drifted into deep pockets that made every step treacherous. She found Marcus standing at the edge of a small ravine, looking down at something that made Rachel's heart sink. At the bottom of the ravine, partially covered by snow and broken branches, was the body of a female bobcat. From the position and the surrounding evidence, it was clear what had happened. The bobcat had been crossing a fallen log that spanned the ravine when the log, weakened by rot and heavy with snow, had given way. The fall itself might not have been fatal, but the way the log had landed on the bobcat's body left no doubt about the outcome. Marcus was already making his way down carefully, and Rachel followed, though she already knew what they would find. The female bobcat had been dead for at least 24 hours, Marcus confirmed after a careful examination. The body was already stiff from rigor mortis and the extreme cold, making it difficult to determine exact time of death, but the snow accumulation patterns told their own story. She had fallen sometime during the previous night's storm, probably around the same time her desperate kittens had begun their search for her. Marcus carefully photographed the scene from multiple angles, documenting everything with the thoroughness that had made him one of the most respected wildlife veterinarians in the region. Rachel stood at the edge of the ravine, her throat tight with emotion she couldn't quite name. This was nature, raw and unforgiving. She had witnessed death countless times in her career, understood that it was an integral part of the ecosystem's balance. But there was something particularly tragic about this scene. 3 kittens left orphaned in the middle of winter, their mother killed by simple bad luck and timing. If that log had held for another few steps, if the snow load had been slightly different, if she had chosen a different path across the ravine, those kittens would still have their mother. "But they don't," Marcus said quietly, climbing back up to where Rachel stood. "And that's why B7's behavior becomes even more remarkable. Somehow she found them, heard their distress calls perhaps, and instead of ignoring them or viewing them as competition or even potential prey, she took them in." Rachel nodded, helping Marcus secure the documentation equipment. "We need to notify the department about the body. They'll want to do a full necropsy, check for disease, toxins, anything that might explain the fall beyond the obvious structural failure of the log." Marcus agreed, but his mind was already moving forward to the more pressing question. Those kittens are going to need more food than B7 can provide, especially in her condition. She's probably in her 3rd trimester based on the belly size we saw in the thermal imaging. Hunting for herself is already going to be challenging, let alone trying to feed 3 additional mouths. Rachel had been thinking the same thing. The ethical dilemma of intervention weighed heavily on her. In normal circumstances, they would document and observe but not interfere. Nature had its own way of managing populations, and human intervention often did more harm than good in the long run, but these weren't normal circumstances. B7 had already intervened, had already disrupted what would have been the natural outcome of the mother's death. The kittens would have died of exposure or starvation within days without B7's unprecedented rescue. By saving them, had B7 created a situation where human intervention was now the only ethical path forward, or would providing food simply delay an inevitable outcome and potentially create dependency that would harm the animal's long-term survival prospects? "We need to consult with the department," Rachel said finally. "This is bigger than just our research project. We're potentially looking at a case study that could inform wildlife management policies for years to come, but we also have a responsibility to those kittens and to B7. If we can help without creating dependency or disrupting natural behaviors, I think we should consider it." Marcus pulled out his own satellite phone, already dialing the regional wildlife management office. "Let's get Dr. Patterson on this. If anyone can help us navigate the ethics and logistics, it's her." Dr. Susan Patterson had been the regional wildlife director for over 20 years, and her reputation for making sound decisions under pressure was legendary. When Marcus explained the situation, her response was characteristically direct. "Send me all the footage and documentation immediately. I'm conferencing in the state wildlife veterinarian and our behavioral specialist. We'll have a decision framework for you within 2 hours. In the meantime, maintain observation but no direct intervention unless the kittens' lives are in immediate danger." Rachel and Marcus returned to the truck where their monitoring equipment was set up, brushing snow from their gear and settling in for what would become a long vigil. The laptop screens showed multiple camera angles of the den, and they could see B7 had emerged briefly, probably to eliminate waste before returning to the shelter where the 3 kittens waited. The thermal imaging showed all 4 animals clustered together again. The kittens' heat signatures slightly stronger than they had been earlier, suggesting B7's body heat was helping them recover from their ordeal. As they waited for the decision from headquarters, Rachel began compiling her research notes into a preliminary report. The scientific documentation of this event needed to be meticulous and comprehensive. She wrote about B7's background, her established territory, her previous reproductive history based on years of observation. Female B7 had successfully raised 2 previous litters, each consisting of 2 to 3 kittens, with above-average survival rates. She was an experienced mother, which might partially explain her response to the orphaned kittens, though it still didn't fully account for the unprecedented nature of her actions. Marcus was reviewing the thermal imaging data, making careful notes about the kittens' body temperatures and movements. "I'm seeing some interesting patterns," he said, pointing to the screen. "The kittens are taking turns being closest to B7's belly. That kind of organized behavior suggests they're not completely naive. Their mother must have taught them some basics before she died. That's actually encouraging for their long-term survival prospects if we do end up having to provide supplemental food." Rachel leaned over to look at what Marcus was indicating. The 3 kittens did indeed seem to be rotating positions, ensuring that each one got equal access to B7's warmth. It was the kind of learned behavior that suggested their mother had been a good teacher in the brief time they'd had together. "How old do you think they are based on their coordination and size?" Rachel asked. Marcus studied the footage carefully, watching how the kittens moved when they shifted positions. 8 weeks minimum, possibly 10. Old enough to have started eating solid food, but still primarily nursing. That's actually the worst possible age for this to happen. They're past the stage where another female might have enough milk to sustain them, but they're not old enough to hunt effectively on their own. The implications were clear. Even with B7's protection and warmth, the kittens would need food that B7 couldn't provide through nursing. Her own pregnancy would have already reduced or stopped her milk production, and the energy demands of late pregnancy meant she needed every calorie for her own developing kittens. The orphans would need solid food, and they would need it soon, or the remarkable rescue that B7 had performed would only delay the inevitable by a few days. Rachel's phone buzzed with an incoming email from Dr. Patterson. She opened it to find a detailed protocol that had been developed in consultation with the state's wildlife experts. The decision was both pragmatic and compassionate. They would provide carefully managed supplemental feeding designed to support the kittens without creating dependency or disrupting B7's natural behaviors. The feeding stations would be set up at a distance from the den, allowing B7 to access food when she chose to hunt, but not making it so convenient that she abandoned natural hunting behaviors entirely. The protocol was specific and well-reasoned. Fresh prey items, primarily rabbits and small rodents that would naturally be part of a bobcat's diet, would be placed at designated locations within B7's territory. The placement would rotate to prevent habituation to a single feeding site, and the amount would be carefully calculated based on the nutritional needs of one pregnant female and 3 juvenile kittens. Most importantly, the feeding would be designed to taper off as the kittens grew and B7 recovered from giving birth, with the goal of complete independence once all the kittens were old enough to hunt effectively. Marcus read over Rachel's shoulder, nodding approval as he reviewed the protocol. This is good work. It acknowledges both the ethical obligation we have given B7's intervention and the need to maintain these animals' wild nature. The key will be in the execution. We'll need to be incredibly disciplined about not creating dependency. Rachel was already making notes about implementation. We'll need to establish the feeding stations today, before the kittens become any weaker. And we'll need volunteers to help with prey acquisition and monitoring. Within hours, Rachel and Marcus had mobilized a small team of trusted colleagues and volunteers to help implement the feeding protocol. The local Wildlife Rehabilitation Center provided freshly frozen prey items from their stock, animals that had died naturally or been humanely euthanized due to injuries that made release impossible. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than allowing the kittens to starve while B7 struggled to hunt for 5 mouths instead of 1. Every person involved understood the delicate balance they were trying to maintain. This wasn't about domesticating wild animals or creating a dependency on humans. This was about giving B7's extraordinary act of compassion a chance to succeed. The first feeding station was established 300 yards from the den site, positioned along a natural game trail that B7 was known to use regularly. Marcus carefully placed 2 rabbit carcasses in a location that would be obvious to a hunting bobcat, but not so conspicuous that it would attract unwanted attention from other predators. They used trail cameras to monitor the station, ensuring they would know exactly when and how B7 discovered the food. The placement had to seem natural, as if B7 had simply found prey that another predator had cached and abandoned. Rachel watched the monitoring screens intently as evening approached. B7 had been in the den for most of the day, emerging only briefly to eliminate waste and stretch. The kittens' thermal signatures showed they were sleeping, huddled together in the warmth of B7's body. It was a peaceful scene, but Rachel knew that hunger would eventually drive B7 to hunt, and when that happened, they needed the feeding station to be successful. If B7 found food easily on her first hunting attempt, it would reinforce the behavior and give her the energy she needed to continue caring for the orphaned kittens. As the sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink, B7 emerged from the den. The cameras captured her movements perfectly as she paused at the den entrance, looking back at the sleeping kittens before moving off into the forest. Rachel held her breath as B7 began to hunt, her movements showing the practiced efficiency of an experienced predator despite the burden of late pregnancy. The bobcat moved along the game trail, pausing occasionally to test the air for scent, her ears swiveling to catch any sound that might indicate prey. It took B7 less than 15 minutes to discover the first feeding station. The cameras showed her approach, the moment of recognition as she detected the scent of rabbit, the careful investigation to ensure this wasn't a trap or the cache of a larger predator. Then, with the pragmatic efficiency that had made her a successful survivor in this harsh environment, B7 took one of the rabbits and began the journey back to the den. Rachel and Marcus exchanged relieved glances. The first hurdle had been cleared. B7 had accepted the supplemental food. What happened next, however, surprised even the experienced researchers. Instead of consuming the rabbit herself or taking it into the den, B7 deposited the carcass just outside the den entrance and returned immediately to the feeding station for the second rabbit. This behavior suggested something remarkable. B7 wasn't just feeding herself. She was actively provisioning for the kittens, treating them as if they were her own offspring despite the biological impossibility of that relationship. Marcus leaned closer to the screen, his voice filled with wonder. She's teaching them. Look at how she's positioning the food. She's creating a learning opportunity. Indeed, the 3 orphaned kittens had awakened and were now investigating the rabbit carcass with the curious intensity of young predators learning to eat solid food. B7 watched from a short distance, having returned with the second rabbit, allowing the kittens to explore and begin feeding on their own. When one kitten struggled to tear into the tough hide, B7 stepped in and made the initial opening, then stepped back again to let the kitten continue. It was the kind of maternal teaching behavior that Rachel had observed in bobcat mothers with their own offspring, but seeing it directed toward adopted kittens was unprecedented. The 3 kittens fed eagerly, their small faces becoming smeared with blood as they tore into the fresh meat. Their hunger was evident in the desperation of their feeding, and Rachel felt a wave of relief, knowing that the supplemental food had arrived in time. A few more days without adequate nutrition and the kittens might have been too weak to recover, even with intervention. B7 waited until the kittens had eaten their fill before claiming the remainder for herself, consuming what she needed to maintain her own body condition and support her pregnancy. Over the following days, a pattern emerged. B7 would hunt in the early evening and again just before dawn, times when her natural prey would be most active. Sometimes she was successful on her own, catching small rodents or rabbits through her own hunting skill. Other times she would find the prey items that Rachel's team had carefully positioned within her territory. The key was that B7 never knew which hunts would be successful through her own efforts and which would be supplemented by the research team. This unpredictability was crucial to maintaining her hunting behaviors and preventing dependency. The kittens grew stronger by the day. The thermal imaging showed their heat signatures becoming more robust, their movements more coordinated and energetic. They began to venture out of the den for short periods, always under B7's watchful supervision, exploring the snow-covered world that would become their hunting ground once they matured. Rachel documented everything meticulously, knowing that this case study would have implications far beyond this single family of bobcats. Marcus had been conducting daily reviews of the footage, and one evening he called Rachel over to look at something particularly interesting. "Watch this sequence from this afternoon," he said, cueing up the video. The 3 kittens were playing outside the den, engaging in the mock hunting behaviors that young predators use to develop their skills. They stalked each other, pounced on shadows, and practiced the coordination they would need to survive as adults. But what made the footage remarkable was B7's participation. The pregnant bobcat was actively engaging with the kittens, allowing them to practice their pouncing on her twitching tail, correcting their form when their stalking techniques were too obvious. "She's fully adopted them," Rachel said softly. "This isn't just provisioning or providing warmth. She's investing in their development as if they were her biological offspring." Marcus nodded, making notes on his tablet. "The energy expenditure is significant, especially given her pregnancy. She should be conserving every calorie for her own kittens, but instead she's actively teaching these orphans. The evolutionary biology here is fascinating. There's no genetic benefit to her. These kittens don't carry her genes, yet she's behaving as if they do." Rachel had been thinking about this puzzle constantly. There were theories about kin selection and reciprocal altruism in social species, but bobcats were largely solitary. The standard evolutionary explanations didn't seem to fit. Unless, she said slowly, we're underestimating the complexity of bobcat social structures. What if there are elements of their behavior that we haven't recognized because we've been looking at them through the wrong lens? What if B7 recognized these kittens as members of her species in need, and that recognition triggered maternal behaviors that transcend simple genetic calculation? Marcus considered Rachel's theory, his analytical mind working through the implications. It would challenge a lot of established research about solitary carnivores. But the evidence is right in front of us. B7 isn't behaving according to the textbook. Maybe the textbook is incomplete. He paused, watching as B7 groomed one of the kittens with the same careful attention a mother would give her own offspring. We should reach out to Dr. Elena Vasquez at the University of Colorado. She's been studying cognitive complexity in wild felines. This might be exactly the kind of case that could advance the field. Rachel agreed and made a note to contact Dr. Vasquez, but her immediate attention was drawn back to the monitors. Something had changed in B7's behavior. The pregnant bobcat had become restless, pacing around the den entrance with increasing frequency, occasionally retreating into the shelter only to emerge again moments later. Marcus noticed it too. Is she in labor? The timing would be about right, based on when we estimated her pregnancy began. Rachel checked her research notes. If her mating occurred when we documented it back in November, she'd be right at the 60 to 70 day mark. That's prime time for bobcat births. The next 12 hours were tense as Rachel and Marcus maintained their vigil, watching for signs that B7's own kittens were arriving. The 3 orphaned kittens seemed to sense something was happening, staying close to the den but giving B7 space when she needed it. Their behavior showed a remarkable awareness of the adult bobcat's changing needs, further evidence that their mother had begun teaching them appropriate social behaviors before her death. As night fell, B7 finally retreated deep into the den and didn't emerge. We can't see what's happening in there, Marcus said, frustration evident in his voice. The thermal imaging only shows us heat signatures, not details. Rachel understood his concern. Birth complications were a real risk, especially for a bobcat who had been under the stress of caring for 3 additional kittens while pregnant. But they had no choice except to wait and trust that B7's experience and instincts would see her through. Any attempt to get closer or investigate would only add to her stress and could potentially cause her to reject her newborns or even the orphaned kittens she had worked so hard to save. The thermal imaging showed B7's heat signature remaining in one position for several hours, with occasional movements that suggested the labor process was underway. Rachel found herself holding her breath during those long hours, willing everything to go smoothly. The 3 orphaned kittens had settled at the den entrance, almost as if they were keeping watch, their small bodies huddled together for warmth in the absence of B7's bulk. It was well past midnight when the thermal imaging revealed something new. Additional small heat signatures appeared next to B7, the unmistakable thermal profile of newborn kittens. She did it, Rachel whispered, relief flooding through her. Marcus was already counting the new signatures. Looks like 2, possibly 3 newborns. We'll know more once they start moving around. The question now is how B7 will balance caring for newborns with the 3 older orphans. This is going to test her maternal capacity to the absolute limit. Rachel knew he was right. Newborn kittens required constant care, nursing every few hours, and complete temperature regulation from their mother. The orphaned kittens, while still dependent, were significantly more independent than newborns. The dynamics were about to become incredibly complex. As dawn broke over the snow-covered forest, B7 finally emerged from the den. The cameras captured her in sharp detail, and both researchers could see the visible signs of recent birth. She moved more slowly than usual, clearly exhausted, but there was something in her posture that suggested satisfaction, even pride. She eliminated waste, stretched carefully, and then did something that made Rachel's heart swell with hope. B7 called to the 3 orphaned kittens with a soft vocalization, the kind of sound a mother bobcat would use to summon her offspring. The 3 kittens responded immediately, approaching B7 with obvious affection, rubbing against her sides and purring loudly enough that the audio equipment picked up the sound. B7 groomed each one briefly, then led them a short distance from the den entrance before returning inside to her newborns. The message was clear. She was still their protector, still their provider, but they needed to give space to the newest members of their unusual family. The orphaned kittens settled where B7 had positioned them, curling together in a tight ball to conserve warmth while the adult bobcat tended to her biological offspring. Over the next several days, a routine emerged that demonstrated B7's remarkable maternal management skills. She would nurse her newborns, then emerge to check on the orphaned kittens, making sure they had access to the food that Rachel's team continued to provide at strategic locations. When the orphans needed warmth, B7 would allow them into the outer chamber of the den, though she kept them separated from the vulnerable newborns. It was a delicate balance, and B7 managed it with the skill of an experienced mother who understood the different needs of kittens at different developmental stages. Marcus had been reviewing hours of footage when he noticed something that excited him tremendously. "Rachel, look at this. The orphaned kittens are bringing prey back to the den entrance." He played back footage showing one of the larger orphans, a male they had started calling Scout due to his adventurous nature, dragging a small rodent to the den. The kitten didn't eat it immediately. Instead, he left it near the entrance and backed away, almost as if he were making an offering. B7 had emerged minutes later, inspected the rodent, and taken it into the den, presumably to supplement her own nutrition as she nursed her newborns. "They're reciprocating," Rachel said in amazement. "The orphans are old enough to begin hunting successfully, and they're providing for B7 now. This is cooperative behavior we've never documented in solitary bobcat populations before." Marcus nodded enthusiastically, already making notes for what would surely become a groundbreaking research paper. This isn't just adoption. This is the formation of a cooperative family unit. B7 saved those kittens, and now they're helping ensure the survival of her biological offspring. It's a mutualistic relationship that defies everything we thought we knew about bobcat social structure. The implications were staggering. If bobcats were capable of this level of social complexity and cooperation, it suggested that other supposedly solitary species might also possess capabilities that traditional research had overlooked. Rachel thought about all the years she had spent studying bobcats, always from the assumption that they were purely solitary except during mating and mother-kitten bonding. How much had been missed because researchers were looking through the lens of established theory rather than remaining open to unexpected behaviors. As February gave way to March, the family of bobcats continued to thrive against all odds. B7's newborns, 2 females that Rachel had designated as New 1 and New 2, grew rapidly under their mother's constant care. The 3 orphaned kittens, now named Scout, Shadow, and Little One by the research team, had become proficient hunters of small prey and continued their remarkable behavior of sharing their catches with B7. The supplemental feeding was gradually reduced as the orphans demonstrated their ability to hunt successfully, exactly as the protocol had specified. Dr. Elena Vasquez arrived at the research site on a crisp morning in mid-March, her enthusiasm barely contained despite the early hour and the 2-hour drive from Boulder. At 51, she was considered one of the foremost experts on feline cognition in North America, and when Rachel had sent her the preliminary footage and documentation, her response had been immediate and emphatic. She needed to see this phenomenon firsthand. Rachel met her at the trailhead, both women bundled against the lingering winter cold, though spring was beginning to assert itself in subtle ways. The snow had started its slow retreat, revealing patches of brown earth and the first brave shoots of early wildflowers. As they hiked to the observation post, Rachel brought Elena up to date on the latest developments. The family unit was functioning beyond anyone's expectations. B7 was managing the care of 5 kittens at drastically different developmental stages with remarkable efficiency. The orphans had essentially become helper siblings, a behavior well documented in some social species, but virtually unheard of in solitary predators like bobcats. Elena listened intently, occasionally stopping to make voice notes on her recorder, her scientific mind already working through the implications of what Rachel was describing. When they reached the observation post, Marcus had the monitoring equipment ready with multiple camera feeds showing different angles of the den and surrounding territory. Elena settled in front of the screens, her eyes scanning the displays with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades analyzing animal behavior. Within minutes, she witnessed what had brought her here. B7 emerged from the den with her 2 biological kittens, now nearly 6 weeks old and beginning to explore their world with increasing confidence. The orphans, Scout, Shadow, and Little One, immediately approached, and what followed was a complex social interaction that made Elena lean forward intently. The 5 kittens began playing together, the older orphans moderating their strength and speed to accommodate the younger biological siblings. But it wasn't just play. Elena could see clear teaching moments where Scout demonstrated stalking techniques to New One, showing her how to approach prey from downwind. Shadow was grooming Little One while simultaneously keeping watch, exhibiting the kind of sentinel behavior seen in cooperative species, but not in solitary bobcats. The complexity of the interactions was remarkable, suggesting levels of social cognition that challenged fundamental assumptions about these animals. Elena watched for over an hour before speaking, her voice filled with scientific excitement tempered by professional caution. What you're documenting here is extraordinary. The orphans aren't just being tolerated by B7. They're integrated into a functional family unit with defined roles and cooperative behaviors. That male, Scout, is teaching the younger kittens. That's cultural transmission of hunting techniques across non-kin lines. Do you understand how significant that is? Rachel nodded, feeling validated in her own assessment of the situation's importance. But we need to understand why, she said. What triggered B7 to adopt these kittens in the first place? What cognitive processes led to that decision? Elena pulled out her tablet and began sketching a framework for understanding the behavior. There are several possibilities we need to consider. First, the simplest explanation is that B7's pregnancy hormones created a state of heightened maternal responsiveness. When she encountered distressed kittens, those hormones may have overridden typical territorial and competitive responses, but that doesn't fully explain the sustained nature of her care or the development of this cooperative structure. She looked up at Rachel and Marcus. I think we're seeing something more complex. Evidence of what we might call empathetic cognition. Marcus leaned against the desk, his arms crossed thoughtfully. Are you suggesting that B7 recognized the kittens were in distress and made a conscious decision to help them? That would require a level of cognitive sophistication we don't typically attribute to bobcats. Elena smiled, the expression of a scientist who had spent her career challenging conventional wisdom. We don't attribute it to them because we haven't been looking for it. We've been so focused on studying predatory behaviors and territorial competition that we've missed the possibility that these animals might possess more complex social and emotional capabilities than we realized. She turned back to the monitors where B7 had returned and was nursing both her biological kittens and, remarkably, allowing the orphans to nurse as well, despite presumably having limited milk production. Look at that. She's letting all 5 kittens nurse. That's not just tolerance, that's active resource sharing at significant personal cost. The energy expenditure required to produce even minimal milk for 3 additional kittens while recovering from birth and maintaining her own body condition would be substantial. Yet she's doing it. Why? What possible evolutionary advantage could this behavior provide? Rachel had been wrestling with this question for weeks. Unless the advantage isn't immediate or individual, what if we're seeing the emergence of cooperative behavior that benefits the species as a whole? In harsh environments like this, where winter can kill even healthy adults, having a larger cooperative group might improve everyone's survival odds. The orphans are already contributing by hunting and sharing food. As they mature, they might continue helping B7 raise future litters, creating a multi-generational family structure. Elena was nodding enthusiastically now, already seeing the research possibilities. We need to track this family long-term. If the orphans remain in or near B7's territory after they reach maturity, if they continue exhibiting cooperative behaviors, we'll have documented the formation of a social structure in a supposedly solitary species. This could fundamentally change how we understand feline social evolution. She paused, then added more soberly, but we need to be careful about drawing conclusions too quickly. This could be an anomaly, a unique circumstance that won't be replicated in other bobcat populations. Over the following days, Elena worked alongside Rachel and Marcus, implementing additional monitoring protocols and conducting detailed behavioral analysis of every interaction within the bobcat family. She brought specialized equipment that could detect and analyze vocalizations beyond human hearing range, revealing that B7 and the kittens were communicating with far greater complexity than previously documented. Different vocal patterns corresponded to different activities and needs, suggesting a rudimentary but functional communication system that facilitated their cooperation. One particularly revealing sequence occurred when Scout discovered a rabbit warren approximately half a mile from the den. Rather than hunting alone, the young male returned to the den and vocalized in a specific pattern that Elena's equipment identified as distinct from other calls. Within minutes, Shadow and B7 had responded, following Scout back to the warren. The three cats then worked cooperatively to flush rabbits from the warren, with Scout and Shadow blocking escape routes, while B7, the most experienced hunter, made the kills. They returned to the den with 3 rabbits, more than any single hunter would likely have caught alone. "This is coordinated group hunting," Elena said, reviewing the footage with barely contained excitement. Not just coincidental cooperation, but planned, coordinated action with defined roles. Scout found the resource, communicated its location, and then participated in a structured hunt with role differentiation. That requires not just intelligence but social cognition, the ability to understand that others can serve specific functions in achieving a shared goal. Marcus was documenting everything meticulously, knowing that these observations would be scrutinized by skeptics who would want every detail verified and substantiated. As March progressed into April, the dynamics within the bobcat family continued to evolve. B7's biological kittens were growing rapidly, becoming more active and adventurous. The orphans had taken on clear roles as protectors and teachers, often accompanying the younger kittens on their explorations, while B7 rested or hunted. The supplemental feeding had been almost entirely phased out, with the family now sustaining themselves through their cooperative hunting efforts and the orphans' increasing proficiency. Rachel stood at the observation post one morning in late April, watching the sunrise paint the remaining snow patches in shades of gold and rose. The forest was awakening from winter's grip, and with that awakening came new challenges for B7 and her unusual family. The increased daylight and warming temperatures meant more activity from other predators, including the mountain lions that occasionally moved through the area and the black bears emerging from hibernation with ravenous appetites. B7 would need to be more vigilant than ever, protecting 5 kittens of varying ages while also securing enough food to sustain them all. Elena had returned to Boulder to analyze the data they had collected, but she called Rachel almost daily with new insights and questions. The vocal analysis alone had revealed patterns that suggested bobcats possessed a more sophisticated communication system than anyone had suspected. Elena had identified at least 17 distinct vocalizations, each corresponding to specific contexts like hunting coordination, danger warnings, food location, and maternal soothing. It was a lexicon of sorts, not language in the human sense, but far more complex than the simple hisses and growls typically attributed to bobcats. Marcus had been tracking the prey density in B7's territory, concerned that the increased demand from 5 growing kittens might deplete local resources faster than they could regenerate. His analysis showed that the cooperative hunting strategy employed by B7 and the older orphans was actually more efficient than solitary hunting, allowing them to take larger prey and waste less energy on unsuccessful hunts. The rabbits that had been the family's primary food source were entering their spring breeding season, which would help maintain adequate numbers despite the predation pressure. One afternoon, Rachel witnessed an event that highlighted both the benefits and challenges of the family's cooperative structure. A young black bear, probably a 2-year-old male recently separated from his mother, wandered into the area near the den. Bears were opportunistic predators and wouldn't hesitate to kill and eat bobcat kittens if given the chance. The cameras captured B7's immediate response as she detected the bear's scent. She vocalized sharply, and all 5 kittens immediately retreated into the den's deepest chamber. Then, instead of fleeing or hiding, B7 positioned herself at the den entrance. But she wasn't alone. Scout and Shadow, the 2 largest of the orphaned kittens, took up positions flanking B7, creating a defensive line. The 3 bobcats made themselves as large and threatening as possible, vocalizing with aggressive hisses and growls that echoed through the forest. The young bear, probably weighing over 200 pounds compared to the bobcat's combined weight of perhaps 70 pounds, approached cautiously. He was hungry and curious, but he was also inexperienced and wary of confrontation. Rachel held her breath as the standoff continued. The bear took another step forward, and all 3 bobcats erupted in a cacophony of threatening sounds, their backs arched and fur standing on end. It was a bluff. It had to be. 3 bobcats couldn't actually fight off a black bear, but they didn't need to win a fight. They just needed to convince the bear that the effort wasn't worth the potential reward. The young bear hesitated, clearly uncertain. He had probably never encountered bobcats before, let alone 3 acting in coordination. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than 2 minutes, the bear turned and ambled away, deciding that whatever might be in that den wasn't worth the risk of injury from 3 angry felines. As soon as the bear disappeared from sight, B7 relaxed her aggressive posture and immediately checked on the kittens in the den. Scout and Shadow remained on guard for several more minutes before finally standing down. Rachel found herself shaking slightly from the adrenaline of witnessing the encounter. She immediately called Marcus, who reviewed the footage with the same sense of awe she felt. "That was coordinated group defense," he said quietly. "They protected the younger kittens as a unit. Scout and Shadow could have fled. They're old enough and fast enough to escape a bear. But they stayed and helped B7 defend the den." The incident reinforced what Elena had been theorizing. The cooperative behavior wasn't just about hunting efficiency or opportunistic help. It represented a fundamental shift in how these bobcats related to each other, creating bonds that transcended typical feline self-interest. Rachel began to wonder if this family unit might represent an evolutionary experiment of sorts, a possible pathway toward more social behavior in a species that had historically been solitary. Environmental pressures, including harsh winters and increased competition from other predators, might favor animals that could cooperate effectively. As spring fully established itself and May brought warmer temperatures and abundant prey, the family's dynamics continued to evolve. B7's biological kittens, New 1 and New 2, were now nearly 3 months old and actively learning to hunt under the tutelage of both their mother and the 3 orphans. The age gap that had seemed so problematic in February had become an advantage. The orphans served as intermediate teachers, demonstrating techniques at a level closer to the younger kitten's abilities than B7's expert hunting skills. Rachel documented a particularly instructive sequence when Scout took New One hunting for the first time without B7 present. The young male led his adopted sister to a meadow where ground squirrels were active, then demonstrated the patient stillness required for a successful stalk. When New One attempted her first pounce and missed badly, Scout didn't give up. He positioned himself to help her try again, using his presence to drive the squirrel toward New One's position. The younger kitten's second attempt was successful, and her obvious pride in catching her first prey was captured perfectly by the cameras. Marcus had been running calculations on the family's energy budget and survival prospects. If all 5 kittens survived to independence, which was looking increasingly likely, it would represent an unprecedented success rate for bobcats in this region. Typical survival rates for bobcat kittens ranged from 30 to 50%, with winter-born litters having even lower odds. Yet here was a family where 5 kittens were not just surviving but thriving, all because of B7's inexplicable decision to rescue 3 orphans and the cooperative behavior that had emerged from that choice. Dr. Patterson from the Wildlife Management Office had been receiving regular updates on the family's progress, and in mid-May she visited the research site personally. As the regional director, she needed to make decisions about when and how to conclude the supplemental support program and ensure that the family's transition to complete independence was successful. Rachel and Marcus presented their data comprehensively, showing that the family had been essentially self-sufficient for over 6 weeks, with the last supplemental food placement occurring in early April. After reviewing everything, Dr. Patterson made her decision. You've done extraordinary work here, both in documenting this behavior and in providing support that was measured and appropriate. The family is clearly thriving on their own now. I'm authorizing the complete cessation of any intervention and the continuation of purely observational monitoring. She paused, looking at the camera feeds showing the 5 kittens playing together while B7 rested nearby. This family has taught us that we still have much to learn about the animals we think we understand. Make sure this research gets published properly. The scientific community needs to see this. June arrived with the kind of warmth that made the brutal winter seem like a distant memory. The forest had transformed completely, lush with new growth and alive with the sounds of birds, insects, and the countless small mammals that formed the prey base for predators like B7 and her family. Rachel had been documenting the family for 5 months now, and the changes in all 5 kittens were remarkable. The orphans, Scout, Shadow, and Little One, had grown into sleek young bobcats, showing all the hallmarks of healthy development. Their hunting skills had progressed to the point where they were catching prey as successfully as many adult bobcats. B7's biological daughters, New One and New Two, had also thrived beyond all expectations. At 4 months old, they were energetic, curious, and benefiting tremendously from having 3 older siblings to learn from and play with. Rachel had observed that the younger kittens reached developmental milestones earlier than typical bobcat kittens, probably because they had multiple teachers demonstrating techniques and behaviors. The cooperative family structure that had seemed so precarious in February had become remarkably stable and functional. However, Rachel knew that this stability couldn't last indefinitely. In normal circumstances, young bobcats would disperse from their mother's territory between 8 and 12 months of age, driven by instinct and their mother's increasing intolerance to establish their own territories. The question that kept Rachel awake at night was whether the orphans would follow this typical pattern, or whether the bonds formed during their unusual upbringing would create a different outcome. If they dispersed normally, the cooperative behavior they had documented would be seen as a temporary adaptation to extraordinary circumstances. But if they remained, it might indicate something more profound. Marcus had been coordinating with Elena to design a long-term monitoring protocol that would track the family through the next critical year. They needed to know if the cooperative structure would persist, if the orphans would establish territories adjacent to B7's and maintain some level of cooperation, or if they would disperse completely and revert to solitary behavior. The answers would determine whether what they had witnessed was a unique anomaly or the first documented case of a potential evolutionary shift toward more social behavior in bobcats. One evening in late June, Rachel was reviewing footage when she noticed something that made her pause and rewind. B7 had made a kill, a young pronghorn that had wandered too far from its herd, a substantial prize that represented several days' worth of food for the family. What caught Rachel's attention was how the feeding hierarchy played out. B7 ate first, which was expected as the matriarch and primary provider. But then, instead of the older orphans claiming priority, Scout actively encouraged the younger biological kittens to feed before him, positioning himself as a guard while New 1 and New 2 ate their fill. This behavior suggested something Rachel hadn't fully considered before. The orphans weren't just helpers or temporary members of the family. They had internalized their roles as older siblings, with protective and nurturing responsibilities toward the younger kittens. The social bonds ran deeper than simple cooperation for survival. There was genuine attachment, what in humans would be called familial love, though Rachel knew better than to anthropomorphize too freely. Still, the evidence of emotional connection was undeniable in the gentle way Scout groomed New 1, the protective positioning Shadow took when the younger kittens explored new areas, the patience Little 1 showed when New 2 wanted to play. July brought new challenges in the form of territorial disputes. A large male bobcat, probably attracted by the scent of B7 and the older female orphan Shadow approaching sexual maturity, began marking the edges of B7's territory aggressively. Male bobcats could be dangerous to unrelated kittens, sometimes killing them to bring females back into estrus. Rachel watched anxiously as the male's scent markings grew bolder, moving closer to the den site with each passing day. She knew this was a natural part of bobcat ecology, but after months of documenting this family, she felt emotionally invested in their survival. The confrontation, when it came, was captured in stunning detail by the camera network. The male, a massive animal probably weighing close to 40 pounds, entered B7's core territory on a warm July evening. B7 detected his presence immediately and responded with aggressive vocalizations designed to warn him off. But the male was persistent, clearly interested in mating opportunities and perhaps territorial expansion. He continued his approach toward the den where all 5 kittens were resting. What happened next demonstrated the full power of the cooperative family structure. B7 didn't face the intruder alone. Scout and Shadow, now nearly 10 months old and approaching their adult size, flanked B7 in a defensive formation. Little 1, the smallest of the orphans, moved to guard the den entrance where the 2 biological kittens waited. The male hesitated, clearly not expecting to face 3 adult-sized bobcats acting in coordination. His ears flattened and his posture shifted from confident aggression to cautious assessment. The standoff lasted nearly 20 minutes, with both sides engaging in aggressive displays, but neither willing to initiate actual combat. The male was larger and stronger than any individual member of the defending family, but he was also alone, and the risk of injury from fighting 3 opponents simultaneously was substantial. Eventually, calculation won over instinct. The male retreated, marking the territory boundary one final time before disappearing into the forest. The family had successfully defended their home through cooperation, something that would have been impossible for B7 alone. Rachel called Elena immediately to share the footage. "This is it," Elena said excitedly after reviewing the encounter. "This is definitive proof that the cooperative behavior provides concrete survival advantages. A solitary female with 5 kittens would have been extremely vulnerable to that male. She might have lost her territory, might have lost Kittens, but the cooperative defense was so effective that the male didn't even attempt an attack. This changes everything we thought we knew about the evolutionary pressures shaping bobcat social behavior. Marcus was already working on calculations showing how cooperative defense could provide significant fitness benefits, particularly for females raising kittens in areas with high predator density or territorial pressure from other bobcats. If the orphans remained in or near B7's territory, they could provide ongoing protection and hunting support, potentially allowing B7 to raise more kittens over her lifetime than a solitary female could. The genetic payoff for the orphans would come from helping their adoptive mother successfully raise her biological offspring, with whom they shared no genetic relationship, but from whom they received protection and resources during their own development. As summer progressed, Rachel began to see signs that the family dynamics were evolving again. The three orphans were spending more time at the edges of B7's territory, exploring and marking areas that might become their own territories eventually. But they always returned to the core den area, and they continued participating in cooperative hunts and defense. It appeared they were beginning to establish adjacent territories while maintaining the family bond, a pattern seen in some social species, but unprecedented in bobcats. August brought a subtle shift in the family's behavior that Rachel documented with meticulous attention to detail. The three orphans were now nearly 1 year old, approaching the age when they would typically disperse to establish their own territories. Shadow, the only female among the orphans, had begun showing signs of approaching sexual maturity, which would normally trigger B7 to drive her away to prevent future territorial competition. Yet the anticipated aggression never materialized. Instead, B7 seemed to be teaching Shadow about territory maintenance and scent marking, almost as if preparing her to claim adjacent land rather than distant territory. Scout had become the family's primary hunter, his size and skills surpassing even B7's in some aspects. Rachel watched one morning as he brought down a young deer, a feat requiring both strength and technique. Rather than claiming the kill for himself, Scout vocalized in the specific pattern that the team had identified as a food call, summoning the entire family to share in the bounty. B7 arrived first, with New 1 and New 2, now 6 months old and growing rapidly. Little 1 and Shadow joined moments later, and the family fed together in a scene that seemed to capture everything remarkable about their cooperative structure. Marcus had been analyzing the territorial range data and discovered something fascinating. The three orphans were indeed establishing their own territories, but these territories overlapped significantly with B7's core area and with each other's ranges. Traditional bobcat territories showed minimal overlap except during mating season, but this family had created a network of interconnected territories that functioned almost like a clan structure. Scout's territory encompassed the northern portion of B7's range, Shadow was claiming the eastern section, and Little 1 had begun marking the western boundary. The implications were profound. If this pattern held, if the family maintained their cooperative bonds even as the orphans established independence, it would represent documented evidence of emergent social behavior in a solitary species. Elena had been corresponding with colleagues around the world, and several researchers had reported anecdotal observations that might represent similar behaviors in other bobcat populations. Perhaps what B7 had created wasn't an anomaly, but rather a glimpse of behavioral plasticity that existed within the species, but had gone unrecognized because researchers hadn't been looking for it. September brought the first real test of the family's resilience when B7 sustained an injury during a hunt. A porcupine encounter left her with several quills embedded in her paw and lower leg, causing significant pain and limiting her mobility. Rachel watched anxiously as B7 limped back to the den, knowing that for a solitary bobcat, such an injury could be fatal if it prevented hunting during the critical healing period. But B7 wasn't alone, and what happened over the next 2 weeks demonstrated the full value of the cooperative structure she had created. The 3 orphans immediately increased their hunting efforts, providing food not just for themselves but for B7 and the 2 younger kittens who were not yet proficient enough hunters to sustain themselves independently. Scout brought kills to the den daily, sometimes multiple times per day. Shadow took over the territory patrol duties that B7 could no longer perform, maintaining the scent marks that warned other bobcats this area was occupied. Little One, despite being the smallest, showed remarkable dedication in guarding the den and keeping the younger kittens safe while B7 recovered. Rachel found herself deeply moved by the orphan's response to B7's injury. These young bobcats, who by all traditional understanding should have been focused solely on their own survival and establishment of independent territories, were instead investing time and energy in caring for their adoptive mother. The behavior couldn't be explained by simple reciprocal altruism or kin selection. It represented something more complex, a genuine social bond that transcended the typical evolutionary calculations. B7's recovery took nearly 3 weeks, during which time the family's cooperative structure proved its worth repeatedly. The younger biological kittens, New 1 and New 2, continued learning and developing under the protection and teaching of their 3 older siblings. By the time B7 was fully healed and returned to hunting, the family had not only survived, but had actually expanded their collective territory, with the orphans having successfully defended against 2 separate incursions by neighboring bobcats during B7's convalescence. October arrived with the first hints of the approaching winter, and Rachel realized that the family would soon face the season that had nearly killed the orphans a year ago. But how different their circumstances were now. Instead of 3 helpless kittens and 1 pregnant female struggling to survive, there were now 6 bobcats functioning as a cooperative unit. B7's biological daughters were 7 months old and rapidly developing the skills they would need to survive the winter. The orphans were fully mature, experienced hunters capable of taking prey that would have been impossible for them to catch alone the previous year. The research team had been preparing their comprehensive report on the family's first year, and the data painted a remarkable picture of success. All 5 kittens had survived to this point, a survival rate of 100% compared to the regional average of 40% for bobcat kittens. The family's collective hunting success rate was significantly higher than that of solitary bobcats. Their territory was larger and better defended than any individual bobcat could maintain alone. By every measurable metric, the cooperative family structure had provided substantial benefits. Elena had been working with international colleagues to place the findings in a broader evolutionary context. What B7 had demonstrated was that bobcats possess the cognitive and social flexibility to adopt radically different behavioral strategies when circumstances warranted. This flexibility suggested that social structures in carnivores might be more fluid and adaptable than previously understood, shaped not just by genetics but by individual experience, environmental conditions, and even what might be called cultural transmission of behavioral innovations. One evening in late October, Rachel sat at the observation post watching the family prepare for winter. The orphans had cached several kills in different locations within the territory, demonstrating forward planning and resource management. B7 was teaching New 1 and New 2 the same caching techniques, ensuring the younger generation would be prepared for the lean times ahead. The scene was peaceful, almost domestic in its harmony, yet these were wild predators living according to patterns their species had followed for thousands of years, with one crucial exception. They were doing it together. Marcus joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee against the evening chill. "We did something important here," he said quietly. "Not just the research, though that's groundbreaking. We gave B7's compassion a chance to succeed. If we hadn't intervened with the supplemental feeding in those first critical weeks, those orphans would have died, and B7 might have lost her own kittens from the stress and energy depletion. Instead, We helped create something that might change how we understand these animals." Rachel nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "I keep thinking about that first night, watching B7 make those 3 separate trips into the freezing cold to rescue kittens that weren't hers. What drove her to do that? Was it just hormones? Was it some deeper recognition of distress in members of her own species? We may never fully understand her motivation, but we can document what emerged from that decision." Marcus smiled, his eyes on the monitors where the family was settling in for the night, all 6 bobcats curled together in a pile of spotted fur and contentment. The second winter arrived with less ferocity than the first, but it was still a test of survival for every creature in the San Juan wilderness. Rachel continued her monitoring through the snow and cold, now with a full year of data documenting the extraordinary family that B7 had created. The research paper she and Marcus had authored, with Elena as a contributing researcher, had been accepted for publication in the Journal of Mammalogy, and the response from the scientific community had been overwhelming. Requests for additional data, invitations to present at conferences, and inquiries from other researchers who wanted to study similar phenomena in their own regions flooded their inboxes daily. But for Rachel, the real story wasn't in the academic recognition or the groundbreaking nature of the research. It was in watching 6 bobcats navigate winter together, using the cooperative strategies that had emerged from B7's act of compassion a year ago. The biological daughters, Nu 1 and Nu 2, were now 9 months old and fully capable hunters in their own right. They hunted alongside their 3 adopted siblings with the seamless coordination that came from months of practice and trust. The family had developed such efficient hunting patterns that they were actually thriving during a season that killed many solitary bobcats. December brought heavy snowfall, and Rachel found herself thinking back to that February night when B7 had heard the desperate cries of 3 orphaned kittens and made the decision that changed everything. The cameras had captured B7's 3 separate rescue missions, each one a deliberate choice to save lives at significant personal cost. Rachel had watched that footage hundreds of times, trying to understand the cognitive processes that had driven such unprecedented behavior. The scientific explanations were there: maternal hormones, auditory triggers, neurological responses to distress vocalizations. But Rachel had come to believe that reducing B7's actions to pure biology missed something essential. There was a moment on the footage, barely a few seconds long, where B7 had paused after rescuing the first kitten. She had looked back toward where the other cries were coming from, her ears swiveling to pinpoint their location. In that moment, Rachel believed, B7 had made a choice, not driven purely by instinct or hormones, but by something that could only be called compassion. A recognition that there were more kittens in danger, and a decision to help them despite the risks and costs. Whether that interpretation was scientific or anthropomorphic, Rachel no longer cared. She had witnessed the outcomes of that choice, and they spoke for themselves. By January, the family's territory had become a model of cooperative defense and resource management. Scout had fully matured into a magnificent male nearly the size of B7 herself, and he patrolled the northern boundaries with dedication that kept competitors at bay. Shadow had established herself in the Eastern Territory and had already repelled 2 attempts by other females to encroach on the family's range. Little One, despite remaining the smallest of the 3 orphans, had proven to be the most innovative hunter, developing techniques for catching prey in deep snow that the others quickly adopted. The cooperation extended beyond simple hunting and defense. When Nu 2 became separated from the family during a winter storm, it was Scout who tracked her through whiteout conditions and guided her back to safety. When Shadow sustained a minor injury from a fall, Nu 1 brought her food until she recovered. The bonds that had formed during those desperate early months had only strengthened over time, creating a social network that provided redundancy and resilience against the countless dangers of wilderness survival. Elena visited the research site in late January, wanting to see the family as they approached the anniversary of the rescue. She stood with Rachel at the observation post, watching the monitors as all 6 bobcats shared a kill that Scout and New One had made together. "The year has fundamentally changed how I think about feline social evolution," Elena said quietly. "We've documented behavioral flexibility that suggests these animals are capable of adapting their social structures based on environmental conditions and individual experiences. B7 didn't just save 3 kittens. She demonstrated that bobcats possess the cognitive architecture necessary for cooperative living if the circumstances make it advantageous." Rachel nodded, her eyes following B7 on the screen as the matriarch groomed Shadow with the same gentle attention she gave her biological daughters. What happens next is the real question. Will this family structure persist? Will the orphans eventually have their own kittens and raise them cooperatively? Could this be the beginning of a lineage that maintains social bonds across generations? Elena smiled, the expression of a scientist who had learned to be comfortable with uncertainty. That's what makes this so exciting. We're watching potential evolution in real time. Whether it spreads to other bobcat populations or remains unique to this family, we've documented that the capacity exists. As February approached, marking 1 full year since the rescue, Rachel prepared a special documentation project. She wanted to create a comprehensive visual and data record of everything the family had accomplished, both for scientific purposes and as a testament to what cooperation and compassion could achieve even in the harsh calculus of natural selection. Marcus helped her compile statistics that were nothing short of remarkable. 0 kitten mortality in a species where 60% mortality was normal. A territory 20% larger than average for the region. Hunting success rates 40% higher than solitary bobcats. Successful defense against multiple territorial challenges that would have overwhelmed a solitary female. On the anniversary of that first rescue, February 14th, Rachel made the hike to the observation post in the pre-dawn darkness. She wanted to be there at the exact time when B7 had first heard those desperate cries and made her choice. The forest was quiet in the way that only winter wilderness can be, the snow muffling sound and the cold keeping most animals in their shelters. Rachel set up her equipment and waited, watching the den through the cameras as the first light began to touch the snow. B7 emerged as the sun rose, stretching in the morning light. She was followed by all 5 of the kittens she had raised, the 3 orphans she had rescued, and the 2 biological daughters she had borne. They moved together with easy familiarity, preparing for a day of hunting and patrolling, of teaching and learning, of being a family in every way that mattered. Rachel found tears freezing on her cheeks as she watched them, overcome by the simple beauty of what had emerged from one bobcat's extraordinary compassion. The story of B7 and her family would continue long after Rachel's research project ended. The cooperative behaviors they had developed would be passed down to future generations, potentially creating a lineage of socially sophisticated bobcats that challenged everything science thought it knew about solitary predators. But for Rachel, the most important lesson wasn't about evolution or behavioral plasticity or cognitive complexity. It was simpler and more profound than that. One winter night, a pregnant bobcat had heard kittens crying in the snow. Instead of walking away, instead of prioritizing her own survival and that of her unborn offspring, she had chosen compassion. She had made 3 separate journeys into the freezing darkness to rescue babies that weren't hers. And from that choice, from that single act of inexplicable kindness, an entire family had been born. A family that defied nature's cruelest rules and proved that even in the wilderness, cooperation could triumph over competition, that love could be learned even across bloodlines, and that sometimes the most extraordinary outcomes emerged from the simplest acts of caring for those in need. As Rachel packed up her equipment and prepared for the hike back to her truck, she looked one last time at the monitors. The family was heading out for their morning hunt, moving together through the snow with the practiced coordination of a team that had been forged through adversity and strengthened through shared success. 6 bobcats who by all rights shouldn't have survived, let alone thrived. 6 lives.